Hello. I realized that my original introduction to Blackwork Embroidery video was about 3 years old, and I wanted to provide an updated video with a better visual on how to do Blackwork Embroidery. First, before you get started, you'll want to figure out what it is you want to embroider. Are you wanting to do a 10th century Egyptian shirt? Are you wanting to do a 16th century English partlet, a coif, something that's Italian? So first figure out what it is you want to embroider, and then that will tell you what patterns to go looking for. Now, once you've figured out what it is you want to embroider, if it's a collar, a cuff, a coif, whatever, and you've got your pattern ready, then you want to make sure you've got your materials. White linen is the most popular with Blackwork embroidery, and also I highly recommend using silk thread. Black was the most popular. If you're going with Egyptian, you can use red, you can use blue or brown. The brown may have been originally black and then just faded over time. But once you've got your fabric and your silk thread, your needle, probably want to use, if you want to be historically accurate, use a slate frame. Otherwise, you can use a hoop frame. Just when you're done embroidering, make sure to remove the hoop frame from the embroidery until the next time you go to use it, because the longer the linen sits in the hoop frame, the more it's going to stretch and warp the linen, and then you'll have a permanent impression of a circle hoop on your fabric. So from there, you've got your pattern, your materials, and you're ready to go. Now let me show you what to do. Now, one other piece of equipment you may or may not want when doing Blackwork embroidery is beeswax. I recommend using it on the edges of your thread, but that's personal preference. This is Gutermann silk thread. You can buy it at your local store like Joann Fabrics. It's thin, not as easily noticeable, but at the same time it's machine washable. Other types of silk thread, this is untwisted silk thread. It's very shiny and very pretty to look at when it's on the spool, but if you can see, it frays very easily. So this is definitely one to use beeswax with. And here is my favorite. This is a twisted silk thread. Again, I still use beeswax on the ends of the threads, but because it's twisted, it doesn't fray as much when you're embroidering. So now you've got your thread, you've got your hoop, your scissors, your beeswax. You're ready to go with your pattern. When I normally teach this class in person, I provide a little goodie bag for each student. And inside the goodie bag, I have silk thread and I have different types of fabric. But to get started, I also include students with canvas to work on. And as you can see, I have already started this. So I am actually going to cut this thread and start from the beginning. Now, once you've threaded your needle, you'll want to find your starting place. And with any pattern, I personally prefer to work from the top left corner and work my way down and across like you would with writing. That's my personal preference because you will be going from one side to the other, doing a dotted line, and then you'll be going back and filling in your dotted line. Now, some people put a knot on the end of their thread. I personally like to weave my tail in. That's personal preference. So from here, I've pulled my thread through. I've got my tail back here. And now I'm going to go down. I'm actually going to skip one hole on this and go to the next hole. So my pattern is going to be every other hole. And then as I pull this through on the front, I want to make sure that my tail gets pulled in underneath, and then I'm going to skip one hole and go to the next hole, like that. And then I'm going to pull it tight. Make sure your tail is woven in. There we go. And then back on the top, skip one hole and go to the second hole. And then pull it through. Now at this point, make sure you want to keep your thread taut, but you don't want to pull it so tightly that you pull your entire thread out. That's part of the reason why you're weaving the tail into the backside, to secure your thread. So from here, I've skipped one hole and I'm going to the second hole, and I'm making sure my tail is woven in, and I'm going to pull it tight like that. And then back on the front side. And with this pattern, I'm just going to do a straight line across and back to give you the basic idea of how to do this. So skip one hole and go to the next hole and pull it through. And then on the back side, skip one hole and go to the next hole. And I'm going to make sure my tail is still woven in. And from here, I'm going to flip it to the front and pull tight. And you want to make sure the tail is still woven in. Now again, some people like to put a knot at the very end. My personal preference is to weave it in, but that's just because one time I did put a knot at the end, and the linen was white enough that when I went to wash it, the knot pulled through, which meant I lost some of my embroidery. So that's why I prefer to weave the tail in. So again, skipping one hole and going to the next hole and pulling it through. And as you can see, my tail is still being woven in. As far as the length of the tail, I would give yourself at least 1 inch to 1.5 inches. Part of that depends also on how small or how big you are making your embroidery. What I mean, for example, on this sampler, this is black silk on linen, and every stitch is every 3rd hole on the linen. But to give you an idea, on these two, the stitch is every 5th hole, so it's bigger. To give you an idea, this flower type and this flower type are almost identical. The difference is this flower on the petal here just has a little dent that goes in the middle. But otherwise, this flower, dimension-wise, is the same as this flower. But you can see the size difference between every 3rd hole and every 5th hole. So if it's every 3rd or 4th hole, every 3rd hole, you can get away with 1 inch tail. But if it's every 5th hole, then I would definitely go more for 1.5 to 2 inches of a tail. If you want to do every 4th hole, that's also personal preference. For me to just do every 3rd or 5th hole, it just depends on how big or how small you want your piece. For example, if you're just embroidering a coif, then you could go for a smaller pattern. Just the same if you are embroidering an entire front part to a skirt or sleeves, then you may want to go with every 5th hole. So now that I've gone in and out, in and out, in and out, as you can see, I've created a dashed line. If this was the end of my line, this is the end of my first journey, then I want to go back the way I came and fill in my holes. So from there, I'm just going to go in and fill in the dashed lines. And this is also where you want to make sure to weave your tail in. So that way it's woven in both on the first journey and the second journey. And thinking of materials as far as the type of needle to use, personally, I just use whatever needle I happen to have. Usually it's a needle that I've used from a cross-stitch pattern. You'll find needles that have a sharper point they poke through the linen fabric, but can also sometimes snag the fabric, so you have to be careful with that. Just the same, if you have a needle that's dull on the edge, it won't snag the fabric, but sometimes it's slightly more difficult to poke it through the linen. And now you can see I've created one solid line. Now if I wanted to do something of a pattern, like for example, say I wanted to do this pattern right here. Personally, what I do is I study my pattern and figure out how many spaces there are in between each little figure. So at this, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spaces in between each figure. So just for teaching purposes, I'm not starting a new thread. I'm just going to use the same one that I have and find a new starting spot down below. So with this, I want to do every 5th space. I'm going to continue just doing as I was and doing every other hole. So I'm skipping one and going one down. So that's 1. Skipping a hole and going up the next one. That's 2. 3. 4. If I can find it, there we go. 4. And 5. Now that I've got my 5 spaces, now it's time to do my little figure. And so from here, if I can bring this up close, by the way, this is a 16th century pattern. Specifically, it's Italian. I'm going to go up diagonally twice to the right, so diagonally up twice, and then one goes up, over, and down. The other goes up, over, and to the side. So I said diagonally twice to the right, going up, so I'm going to skip one hole and go to the next hole, like that. And then pull it tight. This is the back side, and here's the front side. So now you can't see that dashed line, but the next one you will find. So skip one hole and go in through the next. And now I'm going to go up 1, so skip one hole and go to the next, go up. And then over. And down. And now I'm going to retrace my steps going back the way I came. So I'm going to go up. And then over. And down. So with that, I've got the top portion of this. Let me see if I'll zoom in here. So I've got the top portion, and now I'm going to do the bottom portion. Or Actually, I guess it's the side portion. So from here, I'm going to go over to the right, down, and over. And now I'm going to go back the way I came, going back over, up, over, and at this point I'm just retracing my steps, doing the second journey, filling in this space. And now I'm back to the original line. And now if I want to continue my pattern, I'm going to continue going to the right. And I'm going to count 5 spaces over. So that's 2, 3, 4, 5. And now is when you want to go up and diagonally to the right again. So up, and up again. And then here's where you go straight up, and then over to the left, and then down. And then I'm retracing my steps, going up, over, and back down. And now I'm going over to the right. Going down, and now I'm going over to the left. And then I'm retracing my steps, going on that second journey. The goal is to make this reversible, so that way it looks the same on both sides. And that way it should hopefully resemble lace. Well, that's if you're doing more 16th century embroidery. And then if I want to continue, just do 5 more spaces. So that's 2, 3, 4, and 5. And now if I'm done with my pattern, say this is a collar and I've gone from one edge to the other, and now I want to fill in my spaces for the second journey, just go back the way I came. And as you can see, the dashed lines are filling in and becoming reversible. Now I recommend using, this is cross stitch fabric. I recommend using that first to practice on, to figure out what you're doing and how you're going to do it. Once you've got a knack for this, then that's when I would suggest to move to linen. Just because with this, it's a lot easier to see the holes and figure out your pattern than it is to automatically go straight to the linen. Now I've finished my line. It's reversible, but as you can see, I've got a space here, but I still have to fill in this space here. So normally what I would do is I would loop this around and then weave my tail in and out, in and out. before I cut my thread. So from here, I'm just going to weave it in the same as you did at the very beginning, giving your tail about an inch or so. So from here, I'm just going in from the right side and coming out the left side. And just weaving the tail in. And once I'm done weaving the tail in to my satisfaction, it's time to you want to cut it as close as you can to the line without hurting your fabric or the thread. And see, now it looks reversible. Well, I hope that helped to answer some questions on how to get started with learning how to do blackwork embroidery. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe.